If you have a team member or multiple team members who are not performing up to your expectations, and you're starting to wonder if maybe you should let them go, but you might also be a little bit thinking that maybe it's my fault that they're not performing at their top level, then this episode is going to be perfect for you, especially if you're an online course creator, agency owner, or a coach. Welcome back, guys. Today, we're going to talk about how you can use KPIs to track their performance and which KPIs you should probably look at if you want a successful team. And we're also going to talk about how communication impacts whether or not you should let someone go or not. After this podcast, I'm hoping that you will have a clear sense of whether or not you should fire them or train them. I come from a background of the military. In the military, you get handed a bunch of people and you make the best out of them. I could never fire anyone. I could never say, hey, I don't want this person on my team. Actually, the best team I've worked on, my EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal team, were people I didn't want to work with in the beginning. But we didn't have an option. That's not a thing. In the military, you can't just fire your subordinates. You work with them and you make them the best possible teammate that you can. So I come from a perspective where I've been trained to train other people really well because I can exchange them. I see in the business world all the time, hire slow, fire fast. I think that makes zero sense, to be honest. I think hire fast, test them out, and then fire slow. Because I know, and I think you know this as well, with your experience. You hire someone, no matter who they are, you're going to have to train them. They're going to screw things up. It can be because of them, but it could also be because of you or your business structures. And if you want to get more into detail to which one of those that could be impacting your business, there's an assessment at a previous episode. That means that I am very prone to try to train people into the role. So I make sure I don't create a future problem out of this. Because if you fire fast, it doesn't mean that the future is going to hold anything better. Because what if it was you or your business structures? Then that hasn't changed. You just bring someone else on. And especially if your workflow isn't up to speed, then there's no way that other people can do the work for you in the way you intended. And if you want to learn more about workflows, it's the episode before this one, I think episode 6, to learn how to create a proper workflow so that your team can take over your most soul-crushing tasks for you. And you can focus on the 5% that will move the business and break through your 6-figure plateau or whatever it is that you're working on right now. So coming from this perspective, being in the military and seeing that I can't get rid of people, I had to become really good at training them. And that means, okay, so what am I going to train them in? There are a few things that I've found to be incredibly important in this way. The number one predictor of whether or not I'm going to fire someone or not is, can they communicate? Because if they can communicate, we could probably solve the problem. And if they suck at communicating, we just have to solve the problem of sucking at communicating. But in the world of business, where you have the ability to fire someone, when communication sucks, that's when I let people go. That's when I'm like, hey, you're too slow, you're not accurate enough, you're not specific enough with your request or your communication. I think it's time for you to do something else. Because if they're not good at communicating, it's really hard to solve problems. But on the other hand, if they are good at communicating, you can solve most things. Because if you send them a message and you get a response back that you understand and that it is in time, then the communication and the improvement can keep going. So that's a huge part of whether or not I decide to keep someone on or let them go. As long as they are good at communicating, I will probably work for them way longer than most of you guys. And the team that I have on, I've worked with them for very long. I don't go through a lot of VAs per year, as most of you guys have told me that you do. Instead, I tell them, hey, my goal here is to run this business until beyond my lifetime, and I wish for you to join me in that journey. So that means I'm setting them up in a perspective that is like, we're going to do this for a long time, so I'm going to invest in you a long time. I would like for you to invest in this long time as well. This doesn't mean that's always what happens. Life comes in between, the company changes directions, whatever it is. But I go into it thinking that I'm going to set them up for long-term success. It's not about the next reel. It's about the next 6,000 reels. So I assume that they will screw up. And I assume that as long as we communicate, we can figure it out. As long as we implement the right structures, I improve myself as a leader and you improve yourself as a teammate, then we can figure it out. Today isn't as important as the next 364 days. So that's something I want to bring to the table. As long as they can communicate, it's worth working with them. Because chances are, if they're really good at communicating and you fire them anyway, then you just might have the same problem later. Hey, of course, there are things like if they can't perform a specific task, they don't have the certification or whatever, of course, you can't have them on board if you can't solve the task. But I think you get it. So number one is communication. Number two is not meeting their KPIs. And KPIs can be really tricky because KPIs are basically incentives. And incentives are scary because they work so well. So when you create incentives or KPIs, you got to be aware that they're giving you the results that you want. Otherwise, people are going to do things that doesn't actually lead to the big vision or the purpose of your company. One example of this is that I see coaching businesses who have external coaches come on and coach inside their Facebook group. One thing they would do is say, hey, your KPI is to comment 1 time per post. So that means the KPI isn't actually to coach someone or help someone. It's just to produce a message. Once they've done that, they can get a check in the box and they have done their part. If you're not super motivated, not super engaged, then you're just going to make a quick comment and then move on. So figuring out the right KPIs for your company is really important so that you can get the results that you want. I should also mention that KPI is a key performance indicator. That is something that if they do, this should lead to the bigger goal of the company. This is something very important. For example, I have KPIs for myself. I have KPIs for my teams. And I tell them, hey, these are your 2 things that are the most important things. These are the 5% of the tasks you should do. If you do this, you have had a great work week. You have done what you're supposed to do. If you don't do this and you've done a bunch of other things, you have failed. Like you haven't done what you're supposed to do. So this gives a clear direction for your team, knowing that, oh, as long as I do this, I've done the most important things. I really enjoy if they are measurable. I know the business world is super intense of having like metrics for everything, which is fine. Some people do that, but for me, it doesn't have to be always that way. I think there are a bunch of soft metrics, if that's the thing, that are very important to keep track of. So when you're trying to figure out whether or not to fire someone or keep them on the team, the KPI is useful. It's an agreement between you and the team. Hey, we agreed upon doing this thing. I see that you're not hitting the KPIs. How come? Is there something I could do to support you? What can I do to make sure that you hit your KPIs? It's also worth noticing here that I go into it with a curiosity. So, okay, there's something missing. I'm not going to assume that they suck. I'm going to assume that there's something missing. And if I fill that void or that missing thing, then they will hit their KPIs. So here's where the training comes in. Here's where I might change the structures. Here's where I might change the way I communicate to make sure that they hit their KPIs. So my first tip for you here, if you don't have KPIs for your team, if you don't have something each week that they can check themselves towards, then you're probably making things way more difficult than it should be. And if you have KPIs and they're hitting it, but you're not getting the output that you want, you should probably make sure that you have picked the right ones. I asked my VA, hey, could you create some KPIs for yourself? You know the business a little bit and give me some examples of KPIs that makes you engage and make you like, this is something I want to do. And then we can agree upon the ones that align with the business and the ones that aligns with you as a person. So she came back with a list of, I think it was like 42 KPIs. I was like, those are not KPIs. They're not key. They are just really good stuff. Like she would track everything like followers to audience growth to like, there's just so many things. There's no way a person could do that in a week and hit all of them. So I'm like, hey, I want 2 of them. We agreed on 5 published posts per week. That's one of her main KPIs. She needs to publish 5 posts. And then everything we post on YouTube, everything we post on LinkedIn, they count towards your KPIs. Great. Now she gets to own that process of, okay, I need to make sure that I publish 5 things. And if I haven't supported her with the 5 things that she can post or publish, because I haven't recorded this video or whatever, then she's going to ping me. Hey, I don't have anything to publish. Like you haven't created anything so that I can, edit it and post it. So that creates this really healthy loop of what do you need to succeed at your task? And then maybe she'll come back to me and say, hey, I can't hit my KPI because you haven't done your part. I'm like, well, got it. The problem that a solid set of KPIs solve is a clear understanding of whether or not they're performing to your expectations or whether or not they're fulfilling on their contract with you. And we can start out already. Like, do you have KPIs? And if not, you probably need them, some set of it. And if you have KPIs, are they the right ones? All of these are things that we need to figure out. It's not on them, it's on us. Like, how could they perform up to our standards if we haven't set any standards? And if they're good at communicating, we could solve this easily. But if they suck at communicating, it takes a week to get a response, then we can't really fix anything because there's no feedback loop. There's nothing happening. So for all of you guys who are struggling with not really knowing what to expect from a VA, this is your tool. The KPIs are your tool to set expectations and for your team to kind of like, nope, I can't do this because I'm lacking X, Y, Z. And this is where the magics happen. So in summary, to figure out whether or not you should keep them and train them, or if you should fire them, there are a few things for you to look into. Number one, are they communicating? And number two, are they hitting their KPIs? If you're doing it this way, you will have a clear measure whether your team members are worth their salary. You will know when it's generally time to let someone go or when it's time to further train someone. Doing it this way also means that you can make faster, more informed decisions because you have covered the big parts like communication and their actual KPIs. This will also tell you if you're getting a return on investment on your team, which I also remember now that I have a little bit of a calculator for that. If you're unsure whether or not you're getting ROI on your VAs or your team, then if you go to sankosleadership.com/podcast, you join the community. Inside there will be a tool where you can calculate, okay, I'm spending this much on my VA, they're doing this thing, am I getting my money's worth from this? And the beautiful part of all of this is that you won't have to evaluate every day whether or not you should fire this person. You will have a clear understanding that this person needs to stay here, this one needs to go, and it's time. I'm going to give you tips on how to do this and how to make sure that you're firing the right person or how to make sure that you're training the right person. The number one, and we already talked about this, is to select and track KPIs. If you want to, you can just use the CEO dashboard that I use. It's a very simple evaluation tool where you get to say, I hit my KPI, I nailed my week's progress, and here's what I learned. The second thing, you want to evaluate communication. We also talked about this. Make sure that they are communicated in the sense that you get a fast response and the response is accurate. Two very important things. You could learn more about this in the Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He talks a bunch of feedback and how to give people feedback and how to receive feedback in the sense where it's like useful and you could do something out of it. If you're still struggling, trying to figure out whether it's you, your team, or your business processes that is keeping your people from underperforming, then I created a little bit of an assessment. You can find it on the website, and there's also one in the earlier episodes where you can figure out who's at fault here so that you can improve that part. Maybe it's you. Oftentimes when I do this, I realize, oh man, I suck. It's not them. It's not my structures. It's actually me. I'm being late. I'm not doing my part. I'm not recording what I'm supposed to do. So it's a really useful short assessment you can take. And the last tip, if you decide to let them go, do it with 100% respect. Do it with the understanding that these are human beings whose circumstances you probably don't know. Maybe they have a bunch of stuff going on back home and it's completely unreasonable for them to underperform at this moment. Okay, so that's a really short story on how to figure out whether or not you should fire someone or not. You could go into the rabbit hole with this one, but keep it easy. Use my CEO dashboard. Use the tools that I've already created. Don't try to reinvent the wheel unless you really like creating wheels. Some of you guys out there like that. I hope this was useful for you and that you have a little bit of a clear understanding now whether or not you should fire someone or if you should keep training them and make sure that they stay with you for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So go out there, break your 6-figure plateau, and see you next time.